Mizkif's ongoing lawsuit against Emaru, Asminold, and OTK has taken yet another interesting turn. Asminold is attempting to dismiss the case, or at the very least his part in it. His team is claiming that not only has Mizkif admitted to what they believe Mizkif is referencing as these defamatory statements that Asmin might have made, they're also claiming that Mizkif has failed to identify malicious intent or falsity to anything that Asminold has said. And strangely enough, they're also claiming that Mizkif is not actually being identified in the lawsuit. Now, I know that sounds really strange, but I'm going to explain it here as we go through. Before we jump in, really quick, obligatory, 80% of you are not subscribed to the channel. Don't get me wrong, I'm a news channel. I understand some people just tune in because they're interested in what specific topic I'm covering, but I've also noticed this new metric here, new viewers, casual, and regular, and we've got 45% of you have checked out my channel in up to 5 months over the past year. If you're one of those people that just have happened to see me show up on the homepage enough that maybe you just are convinced that you're subbed, consider checking, making sure. But regardless if you do any of that stuff, just thank you for watching my video. Now, to get things started here, we have something that was just filed January 8th, so at the time of recording this yesterday, at the time you guys are seeing this about 2 days ago, and this is defendant Zach Hoyt's motion to dismiss. And for those who don't know, Zach Hoyt is Asminold. Asminold was also included as someone who Mizkif is suing for defamation. Now, right away, we can see that thing I was talking about this individual, Matthew Ronaldo, who we've been seeing referred to and what we believe to be Mizkif from all the previous videos I've done covering this. We can see down here that they mention Hoyt questions both the identity of the individual plaintiff and whether the proper individual plaintiff is before the court. In the interim, Asmin will identify the individual plaintiff as Mizkif. But continuing on with the summary of argument, Mizkif accuses Asmin of painting him as a domestic abuser and emotional abuser. Yet according to Mizkif himself, and quote, you guys probably recognize this stuff, I punched holes in walls or slammed doors in aggression. And how nice of Asmin's lawyer, but they have timestamped everything, and here is, from Mizkif himself, the truth with the timestamp of that claim.
She would throw clothes or plushies at me, and I punched holes in the walls or slammed doors in aggression.
But moving forward, in quote, I'm not going to go back to the place I once was. I was suicidal, depressed, and taking every type of drug possible to fix my brain. And in doing that, I hurt myself more. I was on steroids because, et cetera, et cetera. And then they bold here, in doing that, I know I effed up so bad and hurt so many people around. I lashed out, I was angry and out of my mind. Continuing on, they just add a bit more emphasis to, I did take steroids and that gave me insane anger issues. And quote, I said that if she goes after me, then I will go nuclear, and that is exactly what I said, and that is what is going to happen. And then they also include screenshots, which we have actually looked over before in the past too. This is Mizkif during an off time, like while he wasn't streaming, in his live stream chat, talking about how shrooms screwed him up and how he was like dunking his head into the pool, like trying to drown himself. I'll leave a link in the description to this filing because it also kind of does a good job of collecting a lot of the points that Mizkif had made himself, and they included them in this document because it's helping their argument. And they go on to explain like Asmin's role in this. Mizkif is a public figure who now complains that Asminold, after listening to and reading Mizkif's own public statements, gave commentary about Mizkif's public statements. Mizkif, however, cannot give the court any of that context in a pleading, or it would be obvious that nothing he is upset about is actionable as a defamation claim. There's a little bit of sass with Asmin's lawyer here. Not surprisingly, plaintiff's suit fails to state a claim. Mizkif is a public figure suing another public figure for defamation. Mizkif is constitutionally required to prove the falsity of the statements being made about his own admissions, as well as proving actual malice by clear and convincing evidence, and yet he fails to even point out what the statements were. The complaint apparently doesn't include any of the alleged defamatory statements aside from the aggressor and abuser. And so from how I understand it, keep in mind, I cover online YouTube drama. I'm not a lawyer. I hope a lawyer covers this. I think it's really interesting. But from my understanding, with the law, when it comes down to defamation and making claims against someone like this, you need to specify the exact claims that would defame you. Like the words exactly. You can't just say, yeah, they were saying that I'm a sexual assaulter without like giving them the exact words that they had said. And Asmin's lawyers are saying he never did that. They outline this by saying plaintiffs, I'm assuming Mizkif, neglect to give Asminold or the court the statements as a whole, though, or even the better portion of it, or any source of it, or any date, time, or place it occurred. Both Asminold and the court will need to evaluate each statement to see whether the statement is even actionable or capable of a defamatory meaning. And then Asmin's lawyer is saying that Asmin is fully expecting that they're just going to be pointing out, like if they do outline these statements, they're just going to be opinions, which are protected. That's not, defamation for you to have an opinion about somebody. Keep in mind that obviously Asmongold's lawyer is going to try to make the best and most convincing sounding argument because they're trying to get this dismissed and not deal with it. They might be making a phenomenal point that is absolutely dumpstering on Mizkif, or they might not, because I'm not a lawyer and I don't exactly know the particularities that surround that. Just want to make that clear now, because, it's their job to be convincing. They continue to outline this point a bit more, saying things like Asmon is entitled to know what the actual statements are. Obviously, you don't want to have Asmon or anybody else in a situation where they're being pressed for defamation to not know exactly what they're, going to court over. Now, I think to best summarize this initial point here is down at the bottom here. For instance, Mizkif stated in the only publication Asmon thinks may be at issue that he hurt so many people, lashed out, and had steroid-fueled insane anger issues. Yet plaintiff claims it is somehow defamatory that Asmon believed Mizkif's own widely publicized statements about his own anger. Asmongold refuses, and the law agrees with him. Mizkif's invitation to get inside the head of an admitted angry, violent drug user who goes nuclear on people and then try to guess what Mizkif characterizes as manipulating or hurting others. Basically saying Asmon is not going to attempt to make an assumption of what claims a self-proclaimed, roid-raging, going nuclear dude is assuming to be defamatory statements. The well's already been poisoned, if you will. Now here they go into the factual background, which is again just kind of like pointing out previous controversies with Mizkif that also seem to tie into, Mizkif's self-admitted acts of violence and being violent on steroids, things like that. They talk about the Mitch Jones fight that we had covered in last video, as well as the Nick one with NMP LOL. Mizkif admitted he had an incident with Nick, a part owner of OTK. We've already talked about this. And then, of course, they mention the romantic relationship with Emaru. But I do kind of want to read how the lawyers have outlined it here. I just find it interesting because, again, they point out to things that Mizkif has said already in his response to Emaru's first statement. The lawyer writes, Mizkif was in a romantic relationship with Emaru that he claims was toxic and attempted to shift blame for violence by stating before any statement by Asmongold that his romantic interest, a very petite young woman, was also violent. Mizkif describes that violence further. She would throw a plushie or clothing at him, though he admits to bruising her face by throwing things at her, slamming doors, and punching holes in walls. Now, they're directly saying that he admitted to bruising her face by throwing things at her. So let's see what that is exactly.
She would throw clothes or plushies at me, and I punched holes in the walls or slammed doors in aggression. She brushed over that I threw water bottles or my phone near her, but that wasn't during fights. I want to make that very clear. It would be me throwing my phone on my bed when I brushed my teeth. She did tell me she got a bruise from it, and I stopped. That's all that happened.
Now, obviously, it just linked to him talking about the punching holes in walls, her throwing plushies. I actually had to go and find the bruise one. I don't think that they linked that part directly. And I think that they're saying that, yes, he admitted to tossing a phone and she saying that that bruised her. I think the lawyer's taking that as him confirming that he bruised her by throwing stuff at her. And so down here at the bottom, we start getting these bolded, numbered reasons, I think, the core reasons for why they are moving to dismiss the case with Asmongold and the defamation. First one we've already talked about. A plaintiff fails to allege facts sufficient to state a cause of action for defamation. So they're not pointing out any defamatory statements or statements that are not opinion. Now, the number two, this is where it's kind of interesting and really falls down onto me not quite understanding the law itself, because maybe this is a reference to dismissing the case outrightly. The reason I say this is because just in these first words here, plaintiff gives no allegations about the corporate plaintiff, which I believe is OTK, who is never mentioned regarding any statement by Hoyt, Asmongold, nor would there be reason to think that Asmon would be talking about, if even aware, of the alleged limited liability company. So I think they're talking about OTK here. They're saying that there's no defamatory statements that he's pointing out that have come from OTK. Asmon's lawyers are also saying that this might be stuff that is coming up from things more than 1 year after the initial publication, which is kind of going off of the statute of limitations. Usually when it comes to defamation and stuff, that is a 1 year policy. Like after 1 year, you can't go after them for defamation. I think this has to do with the fact that there's no, definitive specific examples that Mizkif or his team gave in regard to Asmongold and these apparent defamatory statements that Asmongold has made towards Mizkif. Or they're saying, well, Mizkif said this shit himself. Mizkif admits in his own words the very things he complains about, so the statements are incapable of being defamatory. That makes sense. Reading what their lawyer said versus what Mizkif has said exactly, they're definitely stretching a bit, it feels like. In some points, it does feel like, yes, he has straight up said these things, or at least he's said a lot of stuff that he's been violent, things like that, where it's just kind of like, well, it's not really defamation for them to make an assertion based off of what you've already claimed, that you've been very violent, you've been a roid head and have freaked out and have lashed out at people. It's not really a leap for Asmund to also jump in and have the opinions that he does. Number 5 here, something I've talked about at the very beginning here, plaintiff fails to allege facts sufficient to show actual malice or falsity. Now, this is probably one of the points I was more interested in because they say Texas law requires plaintiffs to show actual malice. And quote, a public figure already bears the substantial burden of proving actual malice by clear and convincing evidence. Now, they use the same point that they just did earlier to be like, how can you say that this is malicious if he's just going off of your own words and you were saying you did that shit? And they make mention briefly here of the sexual assault, which I also find interesting, and I'll explain that in a sec. Mizkif cannot fault someone for relying upon his own words in admitting that he is violent, uses drugs, is angry, aggressive, attempted to have sex with Emaru, and punches walls. Now, there's a big difference between, alleged sexual assault and what Mizkif has said, which is that he attempted to initiate sex with Emaru, and he's saying that he backed off immediately when she expressed not wanting to do it. I think they're sandwiching this in between, Miz admitting to being violent in different ways to try to maybe insinuate or just, put it all up next to each other. I'm not here to defend Mizkif, but he has never, at least from the coverage that I've gone over, directly admitted to anything in regard to him saying that he knowingly assaulted Emaru. He explains that situation differently and is claiming that that didn't happen. At the same time, maybe his lawyers are just trying to make the point that it is not a leap for Asminold to agree to that idea, especially given the statements that Mizkif has made. Specifically, the thing I find most interesting is this bottom part here, plaintiffs must also show falsity. Earlier on in this document here, they're talking about this one potential statement that they think Mizkif's team might be referring to with defamation. They say here, for instance, plaintiffs complain about a statement regarding Mizkif and jail. Asmund can identify only one statement he made about jail. The comment was made during a long video commentary about Mizkif's own admissions. After playing videos of Mizkif's own admissions for Asmund's audience to see, a third-party member of his audience, so a viewer, asked Asmund whether he had any opinion as to whether Mizkif was done because of his own admissions and behaviors. Asmund offered an opinion and speculation in response. And Asmund said, I think that he should just take a break. He should just try to legitimately, just stop. I think that he will continue spiraling, and I think it might have already reached this point. But I think that it will reach the point where he ends up doing something that ends him up in jail straight up. I really do think that he should just take a break and calm down. Nothing about that statement is defamatory. It does not even go so far as to advocate that Mizkif should be in jail, despite Mizkif's own admitted history of violence and drug use. I hope that gives that a bit more context as why they included this. But again, overall, it's just you haven't proven that these things are false, so that can't be defamation if you can't prove that it's false or that he was acting maliciously. And now for the big reveal, the last point I was talking about, plaintiff Matthew Ronaldo is not a real person and or the proper party. It says plaintiffs failed to advise the court that the complaint was filed by someone other than the real plaintiff or that an alias is being used. Asmund knows Mizkif to be Matthew Joseph Misrendino, but he is not the named plaintiff. All parties deserve the most basic constitutional due process in knowing that they can obtain a judgment against the proper party, etc., etc. They go on to say, and I like how they describe it, just a little bit of bite. Mizkif's errors in nomenclature are fatal for at least 2 reasons. First, a plaintiff is required to be a real person in a proper party, according to rules. And second, Mizkif must show that the statements are about himself, and plaintiff's complaint, as pled, does not mention Matthew Joseph Misrendino or how the two are related. Now, I don't know how much of that is just a straight up technicality that will be immediately resolved, but I went ahead to take a look and found something interesting with what I covered in our previous video. Now, this is OTK's thing that we talked about trying to compel arbitration, and towards the bottom, they included exhibits, and these were letters, documentation of communication between OTK and Mizkif, or as they refer to it, Matthew Misrendino. Additionally, at the bottom, it's signed by Matthew Misrendino. Now, admittedly, I just glossed over this while I was covering things because I didn't think that that would be something significant. You don't expect that someone is not using their correct name in legal documentation, or at least that they would have clarified that somewhere. But maybe that does end up being an important thing. I can't imagine that the entire thing would be thrown out simply because they weren't using the correct name. Moreover, I don't know specifically which one one is the correct one. It seems like Miss Rendino has been the last name that he's been using for all the other documentation, but I guess we'll see. But that kind of closes out Asmund's attempt to dismiss this part of the lawsuit, if not the entire thing. I'm not sure again about that. I want to also mention, while I was recording this, I also was able to identify a new update in regard to that compelled arbitration bit we talked about in the previous video. It appears that Mizkif's team is attempting to say that no compelled arbitration is not going to happen, and that has to do with some legal shit in regard to when a sexual assault claim is included as a part of a case. Apparently that can negate forced arbitration. I don't know the specifics of that. I'm going to attempt to reach out to a lawyer or two that I know of to see if there's any merit to that, maybe potentially do an interview to talk about that at length, so be on the lookout for that video. But I do want to just give you a heads up, if you stuck around to the end here, this is your little juicy tidbit. But that's it. Like I said at the beginning of this video, if you ended up enjoying this, consider subbing, leave a like, perchance a hype afterwards, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios, peace, bye.